Good day and welcome to COTK Online. My name is Hannah Nell and I serve as the youth pastor here at Church of the King. Today, I want to invite you to get connected. If it's your first, second, 10th, or 100th time that you are watching COTK Online, I want to invite you to get connected in the spiritual family. You can do that by filling out the Connect card on our website or using the link down in the description box below. Today, I would also like to say thank you so much for your generosity. I want to thank you for sowing your money into God's kingdom and trusting Him and see what He can do globally and locally. Today, you can give by texting the number available on the screen. You can also use our website or our app. Thank you and enjoy today's word.
Hey guys, I'm Pastor Kevin. I get the privilege of pastoring our Kinder location, and it's so good to be with you guys today. Let's jump right into the message today. I want to start off today by telling you a little story about my family and about Chase, my oldest son. When Chase was young, probably 8, 9 years old, Chase was playing baseball, but it was the first year that he had gotten into the pitching machine. And so he got up there and, the game was on the line. There's a lot of pressure and everything. And I'm one of those that I sit in the stands. I'm really quiet. Chase's mother, however, is not. She's the mother that is hollering, you better hit the ball. And so Chase got up to bat and they pitched the ball and he swung and she's like, Chase, you got to hit those. And the second pitch, he didn't swing at all. And she's like, come on, Chase, you got to swing the bat. And so the third pitch, he swung, but he missed. And she's like, come on, Chase, what are you swinging at? You got to watch better than that. And, it was just everybody's trying to cheer him on and stuff. But when Chase left, his mom was like, slapping the fence and everything. Come on, you gotta hit those. And he looks at her and he's like, you don't know my life. I'm like, wait a second, son. I'm pretty sure I do. You're like 8. Your life isn't hard. Trust me. But that stuck with me when he ran by that day and he's like, you don't know my life. And I want to talk to you today from the subject of that. You don't know my life. After being in ministry since I was 16 years old, being a senior pastor for 3 years and being a campus pastor for now 2 years, there's one thing I've learned about life is hard. Life will hit you with things that will make an atheist throw his hands up and say, thank you for the blood. But oftentimes I find as Christians, we've gotten really good at covering what life throws at us. We come to church on Sunday mornings and, we bounce in church like, we every week we've had the best week of our life. And we come in and we almost come in like Tigger, just bouncing all over the place, and it's like, I'm so glad to be in church this morning. Yeah. And we go to work kind of like Eeyore. When we go to work, it's like, the real us. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's been such a long week and things at home are so bad and stuff. But I wonder if often we don't have it wrong. That maybe sometimes we should come in church and just be the real us. Like today, I just want to challenge you while we're watching this. Take the fake off. And just look at your life and say, what is really going on? Because the way we walk in church sometimes is like we don't want anybody to know what's going on. I don't want you to really get close to me and know. And the truth is that every one of us, including myself, has a part of us that is saying, you don't know my life. And if you did, if you knew the truth, you wouldn't want anything to do with me. Matter of fact, the statistics show that 10 to 15% of church members can be expected to leave the church each year. Now, in my 26 years of ministry, I've heard all kinds of excuses by people that leave the church. I've heard, well, that preacher's too young and he's too old and maybe he's too loud or man, that guy just preaches too soft. I need somebody that's going to preach harder. And And well, he ought to preach with a little bit more dignity and everything. Instead, he's way too arrogant and proud. And I've heard all kinds of excuses about, the reason why I'm not here anymore is because of the preacher. And then I've heard all the excuses about, well, the reason I don't go to church there anymore is it's full of hypocrites, or the reason I don't go to church there is because of the people, and it's all a bunch of cliques and everything. And what I've learned is it's not so much the church that's the problem, and it's not so much the people. You know, People don't leave because they're going to find a better pastor at the next church, or that they're going to find people that are less fake at the next church. They leave because of one thing, and I find oftentimes, now this isn't the only thing. There are some times that people leave a church because God called them to leave there. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people that leave the church, the one that, when they first walked in the door, the first year they were there, was the greatest church on earth. Until people started to figure me out. I find that when people start figuring out and they start getting close, that's when we throw up walls. We don't want them to know the real us because they may not like us. And when they do, that's when we find the reasons to leave. Because it's easier to go somewhere else that we're not known than to actually change and fix things in our own life and just be real and say, look, I know you've gotten to know me and I have problems. Like, if you got to know me, you might find out that I've got an attitude problem sometimes. You might find out that me and my wife fight. I don't always have the best marriage. You might find out that life isn't as good as we act, as we post, or as we say. Before we decide, it's easier to leave and go somewhere else because it's easier to do that where no one knows me. I want to show you what the Bible has to say about who we really are. In 2 Corinthians 4, verse 5, it says, "For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, 'Let the light shine out of the darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts, to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that all this surpassing power is from God and not from us." The passage says that what we have is a treasure in the jar of clay. You know where we are in this passage? We are the jar and we are the clay. That's who we are. And, preachers used to say at funerals, they used to say, dust to dust and ashes to ashes. Basically it was, we came from dust and we will return to dust. Because that's what we are. We are the jar and we are the clay. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 says, "Then the Lord God formed a man out from the dust of the ground and breathed into him life." That Greek word there, dirt and dust, is actually, the Greek word is called terracotta, which means the clay. So basically, God took clay from the dirt to form us. And that clay is to point to him. See, the goal for us is not to get in the way. The goal for us as clay is to point the way. That way, people, when they look at us, they can look at, as messed up as we are, they can look at us and they can say, let me tell you something, if God can change him, if God can use that joker, then trust me, he can use any one of us. That's the point of our life. That's the purpose of our life, is to point the way to Christ. But what I find, and we do that through our brokenness, we do that through our problems, but here's what I find. Instead, we want to present ourselves as the complete and total package. But honestly, that's not my true story. I'm not here on Sunday mornings because I'm just the pastor. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's part of why I'm here on Sunday mornings, but that's not the only reason I'm here on Sunday mornings. Honestly, as a pastor, I'm here for the same reason you are. I'm here because I'm broken, I'm damaged, and in need of healing. I'm not here because I've got it all together. I'm not here because I can fix you. I'm here because you don't know my life. I see this problem in the churches today. We tell ourselves that God only uses vessels that are made of silver and gold. So if I'm not the perfect thing, then God can't use me. But honestly, He uses our scars, our pains, and our problems and our shortcomings way more than He uses our pride and our perfection. He uses the dirt, the mud, and the clay. He uses us, sinners, because that's all He's got to work with. None of us are perfect. He doesn't have perfect people to work with. So He uses us. But in order to use us in the way that He wants to, we have to be willing to be the clay. We have to be willing to be broken and for God to break us so that the light that is within us, the treasure that is within us, shines out. You know, this reminds me of a story of Gideon. I want to read to you this in Judges 7:20. It says, "The three companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hand and holding in their right hand the trumpets that they were to blow, they shouted, 'A sword for the Lord and for Gideon.' While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their own swords." Let me give you a little background of what's going on. God calls Gideon, and He says, "Gideon, I want you to lead an army. And I want you to lead this army against the Midianites." Now, understand, the Midianites at this time were probably somewheres around 135,000 strong. But it's okay. Gideon's army, he managed to muster up about 32,000 men. So, 135 against 32,000. Gideon's like, "Hey, we got this. We're pretty scrappy." And God looks at Gideon and He says, "Gideon, you've got too many. So, tell you what, tell any of the men that are scared to go home." So Gideon, I could just imagine, like, I put myself in Gideon's place, and I'm like, man, I got 32,000 men here. They ready to fight. You ain't gonna find that many of them that's scared. So all of you boys that's scared, y'all go home. 22,000 went home that day. Gideon goes back to God, and God says, "You know what, Gideon? You still got too many." Gideon's like, "Really? What are we gonna, how do you want to do this?" God says, "Tell the rest of them to go and drink water." Now I could just imagine Gideon's like, "All right, God, drinking water ain't got nothing to do with war. But if you say so." God said to go and drink. Well, we not thirsty. God said, "Go drink. You thirsty now. Go down there and drink." And God said, "The men who cup the water, keep them. But the ones who put their whole face down to drink, tell them to go home." Now, unfortunately for Gideon, this was the minority that he kept. 9,700 went home, leaving Gideon with 300 men. Now, I could just imagine, like, we wouldn't be very good in Gideon's army in this day and age. Like, could you imagine Gideon coming to you and be like, "Hey, you got to leave. God said you don't drink right. He don't like the way you drink. Go home." Like, I could just imagine, man, we'd be hitting Facebook up, we'd be hitting Twitter and social media, we'd be hitting X up, we'd be like, I was gonna fight with you, Gideon. You and your little army think y'all gonna win now, but oh my gosh, you told me to go home because you didn't like the way I drive. I could just imagine us, like, let me show you about my church hurt and everything. We wouldn't be able to have gone in Gideon's army. I could just see people be like, Gideon, my mama taught me how to drink, and you gonna tell me I'm doing it wrong? But I would imagine that if I was in Gideon's place, I would be asking the same question that we need to ask today. Like, if I was Gideon, I'd be like, okay, God, how are we going to reach people? How are we going to raise enough money? How are we going to build more campuses? How are we going to build bigger buildings? How are we going to pay off the ones that we've got? What are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And here's what God tells him. God says, just do what I tell you to do. Now, understand that sounds really good until God tells you to do some dumb stuff. Like God tells you, I think you ought to move to another town and help plant that campus. Then you're like, what? I think you ought to start giving to for the future. Like, God, I ain't got nothing left. And God asks you to do some dumb stuff, and you like, it all sounds great and wonderful until that time comes. And I could just imagine like Gideon's, God, war ain't got nothing to do with how these people drink. And then I love how God just reveals his big plan. God's like, okay, take the 300 men you got left, go get some torches. I want you to light the torches on fire, and then I want you to get some jars of clay, and I want you to put it over the flame, and I want you to smother the flame down. And I could just imagine like Gideon's like, all right, I got the torches, I got the jars of clay. Now when are we gonna get the swords? And God's like, no swords, just torches and jars of clay. And I want you to go surround the Midianite camp. And the Bible said that the Midianites, like, they was partying it up that night. They was drinking and gambling. Basically 135,000 people against 300 at this point. But even if they still thought they were 32,000 strong, 135,000, they was like, we can beat these boys in a drunken stupor in the morning. So they wasn't worried about it. They was drinking it up. And Gideon's like, all right, so we got the torches. We got the jars. God, I really think we need swords. And God's like, nope, no swords. All right, God, time out. Like, I don't think you understand the concept of war. God's like, no. I got something better. What I want you to do is I want you to smash the jars and just hold up the torch. Gideon's like, is that it? God's like, oh, yeah, no, I almost forgot. I want you to blow some trumpets too. Now, this doesn't really make much sense when you first look at it. I want you to smash the jar, hold the torch up, and blow some trumpets? But there's something you need to know about the story. Brings a little bit of clarification to it. See, back then, one torch represented 1,000 men. They didn't have cell phones, they didn't have radios, they didn't have all the communication we had, so they used torches to represent how many men were in different locations. So one torch equaled 1,000 men. So when the Midianites came out and they heard all the jars break and it sounded like a bunch of armor and they saw all the torches, their first thought was that we're not surrounded by 300, but we're surrounded by 300,000. And God's like, I want you to break the jar. And when the embers meet the oxygen, and it flares up and it's able to be seen from all around, then people's going to be affected. Let me ask you, like, are you still covering and acting like everything's wonderful? Or have you gotten to a point in your life where you're like, God, break the jars. I'm ready to be held up. I'm ready to be a light for you. God, let me use my pain and suffering to show other people what you can do, to encourage other people that if you can use me and change me and help me, you can do that with anybody. Sadly, we come to church trying to be too perfect. We don't want people to see the brokenness of us. And yet we wonder why we're only as effective as everybody else. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, it feels like the last couple of years, God has been just breaking areas in my life and holding it up. And then he breaks another area in my life and he holds it up. And the more he's breaking, the more the light is shining. And the more the light is shining, the more people are seeing. But that doesn't happen if all we do is conceal and hide and tell people, don't get too close. You don't know my life. Don't get too close. You might find out that I'm a mess. Please don't get too close. You might find out that I yell at my kids. Please don't get too close. Or when people do get close and they get concerned about you and they're trying to help you and they start finding things out about you, you find somewhere else to go and you find some excuse of why you can't be there anymore. When are we as Christians gonna tell the world and show the world that we're not perfect, but we are jars of clay? You know, Gideon, the name Gideon means two things. It means warrior, but it also means destroyer. See, I've learned something as a pastor that I'm no different than anybody else, except oftentimes I've learned that I am more familiar with my destroyer. And one thing I love about this church is this church doesn't just exist for warriors, but it exists for people that are familiar with their destroyer. So my encouragement to you is just come. Come to Christ. Come to people. Whether you're broken, whether you're weary, whether you're exhausted, whether you're tired, whether you're anxious, whether you're overwhelmed, whether you're disconnected, whether you're lonely, whether you think that people will run from you if they know the truth from you, just come to people and God and say, here I am nothing more than clay. Because God is like, son, I don't care that you've got problems. I don't care that you're not perfect. See, that's my place, is to make you better. It's my place to break the jar and let the embers catch flame. I just need some people that will look and say, God, here I am, break me. Because I've learned something about God. God doesn't break us just to leave us broken. God breaks us to remake us. And every time He's ever broken something in my life and remade it, He has always remade it better than what it was before He broke it. So my challenge for you today, are you still putting on the front of everything's wonderful in my life? And I've got perfection and I'm perfect in everything? Or are you just open, honest, and transparent? And say, I'm nothing more than a jar. I'm clay that God's breaking, God's working with. God doesn't call the qualified, but He will always qualify the called. You know, the one story in the Bible that I love more than anything, and I'm going to close with this, is the story of David. David committed murder. He committed adultery. David had some dark times in his life. He did some stuff that he wasn't proud of. And yet God said David was a man after his own heart. Not because he served him perfectly, but because he served him wholeheartedly. May that be us. God, break me where you need to break me. Let your light shine through me. God, if your light is not shining through me right now, let it shine through me. Break off what needs to be broken so the light can shine, so other people can see it. Other people can be drawn to it, and other people can be pointed to you through the light that shines in my life. If that's you, I just want to take a moment to pray for you. Father, I pray for anybody that's listening to this, Lord, that is saying, that's me, that's right where I am. I've got things in my life that need to be broken off so other people can see the light that's shining inside of me. Lord, I pray that you give them the strength and the courage, Father, to just be honest with people and say, this is where I struggle, this is my hurt, this is my pain. I need help with this. Father, when we do open up, Lord, allow the ones around us not to mock us or run from us or shun us, but to run to us and encourage us and lift us up. Father, let us be the light that shines throughout the dark world, and people can say the only reason the light is shining through me now is because God has broken off what needs to be broken. Father, we ask this in your name. Amen.